doing, I'm trying to do two things. The first is, you'll never be asked during these sessions on Christianity and politics whether you're Republican or Democrat. Right? And when you think about it, you can be anywhere on the voting that we did yesterday and be either party. You can quite easily be Rachel Maddow, MSNBC, New York Times reading person and decide that you really have a huge problem with people using the pulpit for politics, and stood there last night. And conversely, you could be deeply committed to a political witness and think the importance of, say, abortion, protecting the rights of the unborn, and therefore stand in the liberation theology corner. So at no point will you ever be asked the question, are you Republican or Democrat? What we're focusing on are issues that affect America today. And we're thinking them through as people of faith who love the Lord Jesus and are trying to think appropriately how to respond to the complexity of the age in which we live. The second thing I want to say is, you noticed last night is I forced you to make a decision. Now, why do I do that? One challenge I think we all have is we find it difficult to decide. So in other words, I do this when I'm teaching. You know, you're explaining to seminarians, okay, you can think of God as a single consciousness. The Trinity is a single consciousness. That's one way you can think of the Trinity. Or you can think of the Trinity as three consciousnesses in a unity. These are two different, the social Trinity versus the classical accounts. These are two different ways of thinking about the Trinity. So you set this all out to students, and then what they do is they get up and they finish the class and they say, let's go to lunch, and they walk off and they have lunch and then they go to the library or whatever, and they never force themselves to decide what they think. Do you know what I mean? So they never pause and they go, okay, so I've heard these options now. I know they're in the literature. Jürgen Moltmann's on one side, Karl Rahner's on the other. So what do I think? And that, I think, is a very human temptation, especially when the question's complicated. You know what I mean? We just sort of think to ourselves, well, I don't really have the time. And anyway, I need a cup of tea. You know, so you sort of, so what the purpose of the exercise, and of course, just to reassure you, when you walk to a part of the room, you're allowed to change your mind the moment you go back to your seat. I mean, you know, nobody's keeping record or anything like that, but it is just an invitation to sort of, so the idea is I present the choices, you talk to your neighbour just for a few minutes about, okay, how did you feel, sort your head out, and then walk somewhere. But remember, you're allowed to, nothing's binding, you know, nobody's keeping record. You can change your mind immediately. But just the idea is the invitation is to not only hear about complex issues, but just pause for a moment and say, okay, Lord, where am I on that question? What do I believe is true for me and the people I know best and the world I want to live in? You know, so that's the idea of that exercise. I appreciate it's a strange exercise, but it's also, as I said to you, you know, sitting's the new smoking, so that we've got to stand up often. That's the best way to be fit. I work out with a trainer called Bree. Do you know, it's so funny, isn't it, really? So my wife and I are not very good at going to the gym, so we have date mornings where we go to the gym together. I had pointed out to her, this isn't, you know, this isn't exactly fun, getting up at 5 a.m. and working out at 6. But she says it's good for us, so I'm very dutiful. And Bree's one of those people who says, well done! You know, there I am wheezing. And you know, and she's, I don't know, 24. And I mean, you sort of know that she's thinking, okay, you're an old codger. Yes. But you managed to do the plank for 30 seconds, well done. Do you know the interesting thing, I'll get on to the talk in a moment, but have you seen that happiness curve data? Yeah, I always find this, pastors should know about this, rectors, anybody who's rector in the room, or anybody in lay leadership. So, so the happiness curve data is now, what's interesting about this data is it's global, it's cross-gender, and it's cross-cultural. Every human life in terms of happiness follows a similar shape. It's a U shape. So basically you go from 18 to 29. 29 is one of the two, of average America. 29 is one of the two happiest years of your life. And then you start tumbling down. Now, of course, as you start tumbling down initially, it's because life's getting more complicated, and you're married, you've got children, you know. College is fabulous because you have so much vacation. When you're working, you only have 11 days. You know, so it's all a big shock to the system. You're tumbling down. And your most miserable year of average America is 48. Okay. And then actually the bottom's quite a long dip. There's a long dip. And why is that miserable? Because you're worried about elderly parents, you're worried about children, you realise you won't be a quarterback for the Patriots. You know, your dream of your youth has gone forever. You would love to retire, but you've still got another decade of work to go. You know, it's the grind years. And there are these social scientists and behaviourists now who are arguing that, in the same sense we invented adolescence about 30 years ago as a category of development for children, so we now need to invent a name. Because it isn't the midlife crisis, actually. It's more like a midlife discontent. So this is really important for, you know, those of you who've got adult children entering this phase. It's a very serious season of, it's when you go off and buy a fast car, and, you know, but there's also a season where a lot of marriages break up. And then you come out of that in your late 50s, and your second happiest year of your life, 69. And then it's all health related. Yeah, so there you go. Now you know. So Tim, where are you in the happiness line? You're tumbling down still, aren't you?
I'm on a downward trend, but
on a downward trend.
In a couple of decades, I'll get back to 16.
Okay. You're supposed to say, no, I'm 28. I'm coming to my best years still to come. Okay, right. So we're going to do a bit of political theory now. Because why am I doing political theory with you? Because if you want to understand some of the issues around immigration and guns, you need to understand the view of the state that's being assumed. And if you want to understand how popularist administrations throughout the world, you know, not just America, but throughout the world, Italy and Britain, you know, what they're feeding on, this divide between John Locke and Hegel captures it all. It's a very key debate for understanding our moment. So I'm going to do a bit of political theory. This is quite technical, but, you know, I met you all 4 years ago, and I was confident, you know, you'll get all this. And the way you want to think about this is there's a spectrum. So we're going to have Hegel over here in the yellow, and we'll have John Locke over there with Dan. And if you're very committed to one side or the other, just walk pretty close to the ends. But actually, you want to really see this as a spectrum, right? It's very important to see this as a spectrum. So what you're really deciding is where on the spectrum you are. And I think many of you will find yourself thinking, okay, I'm perhaps 60% on that side, but therefore you'll end up about here. Or I'm, you know, so this is a very interesting debate. And when you get this debate, you'll start understanding a lot of what's going on. It's a key matrix to make sense of the moment we're in. And you know, what I'll do is I will defend each position in its extreme form. Okay? Right, that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to start with John Locke, who stands over here. Hello everybody, I'm John Locke. I'm, of course, a 17th century political theorist. I was actually employed most of my life as a doctor, although it wasn't a particularly good one. But I was a really good political theorist, and I wrote the famous text, The Two Treaties of Government, and a letter concerning toleration. So let's understand what the state is. And to understand the state, you've got to understand that first and foremost, each one of us is an individual. You know, that's what we are. We're each individuals who have decided to come together to live under law. What I think happened historically is that once upon a time there was no state, there was no law, and people used to just go around doing what they liked. If they saw something, they would steal it. If they got angry, they would murder. You know, there was general mayhem, and it was an anarchy, an anarchic environment. And then people started saying, okay, I've got all this freedom, but this freedom's actually not that great because I'm constantly in fear and it's disorderly. So what I need to do is I need to surrender some of my freedom for the privilege of living in an ordered society. So that's exactly what happened. People said, okay, I'm willing to surrender some of my rights to do whatever I like in exchange for the order of society. I will surrender some of my freedoms to live in a framework that provides law and order. The great thing about this is that we now live in a state where there are laws, but notice the rule here. The laws of the state should only restrict freedoms insofar as they're necessary for you to live under law. In other words, it's not for the state to say what you do at home. That's your personal life, your private life. You can do whatever you like in the privacy of your home. You can play for the Blessed Virgin Mary 100 times a day, or you can watch pornography. Whose business is it to interfere with that? That's just private. The only things that matter are when you intersect with other people. If you want an analogy, perhaps a good image is like a sort of good business hotel. In a good business hotel, the understanding is you can basically do what you like in your room. So you can meet up with your lover, you can read the Bible provided by the Gideons, you can watch one of those adult channels. That's nobody's business except yours. You are making the decisions, you're an adult, you're allowed to do what you like in your hotel room, and then when you go down, you're expected to be dressed. And you don't sort of, copulate in the middle of the dining room. You know, there are certain, you observe the laws of the public spaces. In your hotel room, you can temporarily put a picture of Karl Marx on the wall if you wish, or Marilyn Monroe first movie, or whatever you like. You can do, but in the public spaces, no. You respect the public spaces as neutral, and you do whatever you wish. You don't do whatever you wish. You respect the conventions of the public spaces. So on this picture, we all are individuals. And we're all opting to live under government. In this picture, you can be a Hindu, or a Muslim, or a Buddhist, or an atheist, or anything, provided you agree to live under the laws of the public spaces. Hello everybody, I'm Hegel, and I am, of course, one of the great Enlightenment philosophers. I am a political theorist who actually explained how state really came to be. And the first thing I want to say is everything you've heard from John Locke is wrong. It's wrong historically. We weren't a bunch of individuals all being anarchic in the past. What actually happened is people were born into families. And families were part of communities. And state actually evolved out of a shared culture. So what happened is people in a certain geography bonded together because they had a similar worldview, a similar religion, a similar language, and they formed a cultural identity. That's what the state is as a matter of history. And therefore, if you're going to have any state, there's got to be a sharedness amongst those who are in the state. A state that's made up, that's too diverse, actually cannot function. You know, when you think about Yugoslavia, which disintegrated into civil war, the only way Yugoslavia survived was when a strong man, dictator, had control of that country. But the moment that control disappeared, the ethnicities of that country emerged, and it slowly splintered into three: a Muslim, an Orthodox, and a Catholic branch. And so, the truth is that nations are cultures. And when you see that truth, then we have an obligation to recognize that what a culture is of a nation is important to preserve and protect. You cannot have an effective nation unless that sort of shared affirmation and identity. Now, that's just the way it is. That's a sort of sociological reality. Insofar as a culture changes, it can only change very gradually. You can't expect a culture to change dramatically or quickly. I have a bit of a problem with that. The beauty of seeing us all as individuals is that that's who we are. We are individuals. And it shouldn't bother me if my Muslim neighbour wants to pray 5 times a day in their home. Now, granted, if they want to wrap on munitions around their waist and walk into a cafeteria and blow people up, that's well out of order. But so is anybody who decides to do that. So let's keep this very simple. The world can handle different human beings. That's all we're asking the world to do. And the only condition to participate is that you agree to live under a shared framework of law. Do you know, the most human thing in the world is to feel at home. And by feeling at home, I don't just mean feeling at home in your physical home. I mean feeling at home in the neighbourhood in which you live. And when you suddenly find yourself living in Beckwith and bumping into people who wear burqas, you no longer feel at home. Now that isn't a wrong feeling. That's just called being human. And it is just the way it is. We need to have a realism here that admits that that sense of feeling at home is a legitimate aspiration of all people everywhere. You know, Saudi Arabia is a country which is very clear about its cultural identity. And that should be true of all countries. Every country should have the freedom and right to be sure of its own cultural identity. It isn't that we're not just individuals. That's a pernicious lie. We're actually all born into families. And families bring with them a cultural identity. And therefore, we have that cultural identity. It's part of being human, and that needs to be taken seriously. My position here is the organic view of the state. Well, my position is the social contract theory of state. It's a contract between the individual and the state, where I surrender certain rights to live under law. I think you can be anything you wish, provided you do not harm others. So I'm okay with homosexuality, I'm okay with pornography, I'm okay with people holding lots of guns. All of that's fine, provided you agree to live under law. I think it's okay for a culture to say, we want our public squares to be comfortable for the place in which we live. So if I live in a place which thinks alcohol's a problem and should be sold on Sunday, I think a culture or a neighbourhood's allowed to say that. If I live in a place where everybody takes the view that one man should be married to one woman, and that's it, it's okay for that culture to say we are a culture that believes same-sex marriage is inappropriate. Because in the end, the reality is nationhood is only stable when it reflects a particular culture. And although cultures can change and evolve, and they do, that needs to happen gradually and slowly, and ideally with a process of assimilation. It shouldn't be incumbent on people who've lived here for generations to find all their traffic signs suddenly being bilingual. That is unreasonable. There's no reason for that to happen, and it's not healthy for the people who are trying to be integrated into that community, for them not to do the hard work of learning a language, which is part of the dominant community of which they're a part. If I emigrated to another country, I would do the hard work of learning that language. I would not expect the country to accommodate my language minority with lots of signage that enables me to navigate that culture. So who is right? Are you a social contract advocate, or are you an organic advocate? Turn now to your neighbour, or if you prefer, just sit still for a moment and decide where on the spectrum you would like to walk.
Yeah,